Hello, my name is Joy D. Fanning of Astronaut of Life. I help spiritual seekers go inward to explore through meditation. Today, though, we are going to continue our exploration of Dolores Cannon's The Convoluted Universe. She divides her book up into parts, and this part is part three, where the main bulk of this part I want to say is chapter 6, which is all about Atlantis. Um, 7 and 8 are also things dealing with Earth. She asks about like the Nazca lines, Loch Ness, Bermuda Triangle, things like this, crop circles. But since most of the part is focused on Atlantis, and I don't want to make this video like insanely long, I'm going to focus on Atlantis. So that's what we're doing today. I want to precate this with, I don't, before I read this book, like I knew of Atlantis. I know a lot of people have their own like opinions about Atlantis, but I didn't really have an opinion about Atlantis. I I didn't really know much about it. So this was very educational for me. It gave me more of an idea of what people are talking about when they talk about Atlantis as a civilization. Just in case you don't know, this book, Convoluted Universe, is based on Dolores Cannon's work as a hypnotherapist, leading people into their past lives. And sometimes when they went into a past life, they would also end up like channeling. Let's turn off the phone, silent, channeling different things, different beings, and that's where some of this information comes from. Other people are experiencing a life in Atlantis, so she kind of goes through it all. Some of it's contradictory, but her way of working through that is understanding that Atlantis spanned, that civilization was thousands of years old. So if you have like a 2,000-year-old civilization, there's going to be different phases, so to speak, in their evolution, right? If you like this kind of content, you love talking about this, maybe you wish you were on your own YouTube doing stuff like this, I would totally encourage you to join me and anybody else who shows up. I've changed the date, so it's a little different than what I've said in past videos, but it's now on November 2nd at 6 p.m. Central Time. We're going to meet on Zoom and just discuss this book and the different topics that this book deals with. Just kind of open-ended, cool people talking about cool shit. So if you're into that, please, by all means, join us. Okay, so I'm pulling up my book now. I did highlights in chapter 6, so let's go ahead and put me over here. So I'm there too. Okay, so Dolores, this is what D represents. I'm not even going to go over who she's talking to because it's a variety of people, but she's asking, was this the first advanced civilization on this planet, or were there others before that? So she's been referencing Atlantis, and the person says, it's hard to say. They stretch so far back. It looks like before Atlantis arose, the main civilization on this earth was from the galactic community helping mankind. They helped Atlantis to develop so that mankind would develop their own civilization, which is what mankind needed to do in order to eventually join the galactic community. So they're essentially talking about the Galactic Federation. They were upset because when Atlantis was destroyed, mankind was on the verge of joining the galactic community. But when it was destroyed, it shook mankind so severely and knocked them so far back that they could not join the galactic community then. This has popped up a few times where people start talking about this galactic community. As we go into this different stuff with Atlantis, we'll kind of see why it was destroyed and why we got knocked back so severely. So the next one's on the next page. There were other civilizations, but you want to zero in on this one at a time. So you're still talking about Atlantis. You seem to desire the information about this one, Atlantis. So I will make reference to the other civilizations. The development was steady in all of these civilizations. Atlantis was slightly ahead because they started developing first, but the other civilizations developed as well, so they could all work together for the good of mankind. It was necessary. So the civilization continued to advance. The people were a pretty people, as they were generally happy and good featured. They were emotionally healthy as well as physically healthy, which helped them to help make them a fair people, not meaning necessarily light, but fair as in pretty. Your language is very imprecise with its descriptive words. Apparently, she gets told that more than once that English is not the best. Keep going. So, right now in this chapter, Dolores is really like trying to get the nitty gritty of Atlantis. She's really working hard to dig in, wanting to know what they look like, what they did, daily life. So she's like, I want a mental picture. So I'm not really going to go over what they look like. They were human. But I thought this was interesting. They did not base their culture on metal like we do, the way yours does. They believed in using materials as close to the original condition as when they were obtained. So they use a lot of the stone and clay for their buildings, and their sciences developed directly into the manipulation of energies. So they could manipulate all types of energy, including such things as gravity. Hence, they were able to erect buildings using huge blocks of stone that seemed impossible to you with the basis and mindset of your civilization. So let's stop sharing for a second. So I thought that was super cool because that can get into like, oh, is that how they made the pyramids? Is that how, which she does kind of ask about in chapters 7 and 8, like, what about Stonehenge? What about Easter Island? All these things. And the answers she got were like, yeah, they learned how to like levitate stone. I think we'll get into it a little bit where they learned to like change the energy or property of stone to make it moldable or malleable. That's the word I'm looking for. Super cool stuff. Let's keep going. Okay. They also developed their psychic abilities. So, not everybody in Atlantis had psychic abilities, but they were way more developed than they are now. But the only way they could develop them was by using them. Let's just keep going. Move this down a little bit. Okay, I think the scientists are expecting to find something written down or carved. So Dolores is saying, like, hey, we're still looking for Atlantis today. Maybe our scientists are looking for something that's like written or, pictographs, anything that can kind of prove that it was there. Are we ever going to find that? And they said, yes, the record is there, but it's on the psychic planes. It's very organized and it's stored and it's ready to use, and it will be of a great benefit to your world. It's almost like the Akashic records, but not quite. because Akashic records are part of the universe. They took that concept and found it could be used to set up a different sort of records. It exists in a sort of energy level. Interesting, right? So we also have, oh, that's the second one. Let's keep going. So they kept their records, but it's like the Akashic. So no like Great Library of Alexandria or anything like that. There was no written thing. They were more into energy and their psychic abilities. So that's how they stored it, which makes sense. It's almost like putting it in the cloud, right? All right, diving back in. They were psychically developed. Okay, let's see. I'm going to read this whole answer because I found this interesting. So the Atlanteans were psychically developed, but when it was destroyed, it scared them. It gave them the equivalent of mental trauma. Like when an individual suffers a severe mental trauma in their younger life and it affects them the rest of their life, unless they become aware of it and work through it and resolve it. The entire human race received that equivalent. So when Atlantis fell, we all became kind of fearful of psychic abilities on some level, humanity as a whole. And also, in the way in which Atlantis was destroyed, and the way the psychic focusing centers were destroyed, it gave everybody a temporary psychic burnout. It would be like accidentally seeing an explosion too closely, and your eyes would be temporarily blinded. So that's like what? Let's go to the next page. Well, did they stay in that type of development for a long time? So let's see what they're talking about. Yeah, they're talking about using crystals. They use crystals for focusing certain types of energies, for contacting the galactic community. They could do it mentally, but to help amplify the mental energies, they would use certain types of crystals. The science of crystallography was extremely advanced. We're going to see this a lot in this chapter. Apparently, Atlantis uses crystals for so many things, to power things, to make things move, to amplify things. And Dolores also, sorry, I got a nose itch today. Dolores also asked them, like, well, we have crystals now. Were they the same kind of crystals? Like, could we do it now? And sadly, the answer is like, no, they use their psychic mental stuff to modify the crystals and like tune them into whatever they wanted to do. So it's not necessarily something we can mimic today, but they were like a crystal psychic based society. So here's an example of that. So they had street lights, interior lights, spotlights, depending on what kind of light was needed. And there were other types of crystals that radiated heat to help warm houses. So they did not cut down their forests and build fires. Let's go to the next page. They could use these crystals instead and save their forests for articles of furniture or simply for growing and oxygenating the air. So again, they use crystals in very practical ways. Can you imagine having a light fixture that's just a crystal? She talks later about how they would make art out of it and it would be like a crystal artwork for your light. And all they really had to do was mentally turn it on or off. What? I know, right? That would sound so cool. Um, and then have other crystals that just radiate heat to like be your heating system. I really want to like write a story or something that is just set in this world. So now Dolores is asking, well, can they like go to another, do they have spaceships? And the person's, this is a new person talking, and they said yes. However, they were not of the same type of construction as we would imagine. Remember, they don't use the metal like we do. There were those people who were allowed this possibility. However, they were the high priests or high functioning order who were in communion with those in the star nature, so aliens. These were not common experiences among the general populace. Those were who were of the highest moral character and understanding were allowed this experience as part of their learning and spiritual evolution. It was not a pleasure type of experience. It was given in the context of learning. So now she moves on to is there anything about Atlantis that we can see today? And it's like, well, they're going to come out of the Atlantic Ocean. But however, there is not at this time what one would call parts of the original dry land. Nothing significant, and it was in the Atlantic Ocean. So that's where it was at. Keep moving on. There were indeed other civilizations and continents previous to the Atlantean culture. However, none have surpassed that which was found in Atlantis at that time, speaking strictly from a moral and character standpoint. So this person is saying that, excuse me, I need a drink of my water. Ooh, that feels good. Ooh. Okay, they're saying that there were other civilizations at the time of Atlantis, but nothing at the same level of height that Atlantis has. And apparently, Atlantis, from what I've gathered in my reading, was even at a greater height than we are now, mainly due to their way to manipulate energy and using their psychic stuff. But it also talks about at the end, they kind of went the dark way, and that's why they got destroyed. Because it was just like, dude, we can't have these people doing this shit. Let's jump 10 pages. So now Dolores is asking, did they ever physically meet with aliens? And they're like, yeah, they were given the ability to communicate directly or to meet in person with those who were of another nature. So they were meeting aliens. That's pretty cool. So one thing I love about Dolores is she'll do these transcriptions of these meetings. You can drink again, guys. Sorry. And like afterwards, she'll tell you a little bit about her perspective from the session. So let's see, why did I highlight this? She's talking about Atlantis still. This was a difficult session for me. There seemed to be an energy emanating from Phil, even though he was not in close proximity to the city. He was viewing Atlantis like an Atlantean city, but there was like really negative things going on. If I remember, they made like these hybrid animal human things, and they were like having like some kind of fight with them, making them fight each other. And he was just like, this is really cruel. He didn't like it either. It gave me a slight headache and disturbed my line of thinking and questioning. Also, sorry, I'm pausing again. About that city, I remember them talking about how not everybody could live there because of its vibration. Okay. It was difficult to form questions and concentrate. It was also strange that when I left this session, I went to John's apartment for a session on the Nostradamus material. I had another strange experience. This was the day that the evil Emma zapped me with his energy. This was reported in Conversations with Nostradamus, Volume 2. Two occasions in one day of being exposed to a strange type of energy. Coincidence. So they're talking about this negative Atlantean energy, and then she had another negative energy experience. This looks like a good question. What could they do that we can't do today? There was nothing that was done then that could not be done today. However, the motivation is perhaps lacking in a majority of the people we see on your planet at this time. There are many who are trying to regain that lost knowledge. So then she's like, well, what's the freaking lost knowledge? And they're like, there are, however, those who have the ability to change their accepted realities so they may then model themselves as another creature entirely. This is not a transgression of universal law, but merely an application of universal law. So he's talking about shape-shifting, that there are people today on this planet who just innately know how to shapeshift. And he's like, it probably freaks him out, but that was something that, they knew how to do back then. So they were still talking about the shape-shifting abilities and how the Atlanteans did it. And she's like, so you mean they did it for bad reasons? He's like, that's accurate. The purposes for which these talents were given were being discarded at an alarming rate. And so it was seen that this ability would necessarily have to be removed in order to prevent the wholesale destruction of the civilization at large. So, excuse me, like, that's pretty crazy. Apparently, humans cannot be trusted. Apparently, still few can do it, but not everybody can because we abused it. Let's keep going. So she's asking, the Atlanteans were so developed mentally and intellectually, they did these things as an experiment. I think now they're talking about taking an animal and a human and mixing them. It would be more accurate to say that they were far more aware. So she's asking, did these hybrid beings have an awareness or an intelligence? And they're saying not so much intellectually as simple open-minded, for they seem to be quite a distinction here. Let's keep going. So when these forms appeared, like half man, half horse, and other different ones of this nature, were they able to reproduce of their own kind? No, for theirs was not a genetic blueprint. They were merely expressions of that which was of the spiritual nature, and not in and of themselves a race of beings such as you have now. There are those races of beings, they be human or animal. So this came up quite a bit, this half human, half animal beings, which we see in mythology now, like a centaur, right? Is what she was talking about, half horse, half man. And I don't remember if I highlighted it, but I'm remembering it now. So there's a parts where these beings were like made. They were not natural. The Atlanteans made them. They weren't fully, they didn't think like a human. They had a little more understanding than like an animal. And they were mainly like animals with human faces. Um, so maybe not quite like a full-fledged centaur where it's cut in half. Um, they were mainly used as, dare I say, like the slave labor, but the person who channels that info is like they weren't necessarily slaves, like they were just servants, and they were really well loved, like a pet, and the family really loved them. And these creatures would do all the cooking, they would do the cleaning, and they would work in the fields, and the mermaids would like catch the fish, and the Atlanteans, showed a lot of love to them. And this is how it was in the beginning with these hybrid creatures, people, things. But then over time, it kind of morphed into this negative thing where it was like they made them even more grotesque looking. They weren't really perceived as pets or things to love, and they were made to just entertainment purposes to watch them. Like, oh, what if we made like a man in a bull and made it fight like a human eagle thing? Like, which one would win? And they would just make them fight to the death. So it started off all right, you could say, maybe a little like okay, and then it morphed into something gross and sad. Let's keep jumping in. We don't need that. Okay. Let's keep going. So, so she's asking, do we have control over our own bodily cellular structure? Can we just with our minds talk to our body and work with our own energy to change things in our body? Kind of like a shapeshifter thing, but we'll see. And they're saying this is accurate. You should understand that this control is not to a great degree or on a conscious level. The physical expression is an accurate representation of the energy of which you are. Okay, to me, that's deep. And therefore, you cannot, in and of your free will, change your reflection. So I can't say, I want blonde hair. I can physically dye it, right? But with my mind, I can't just tell my body we have blonde hair and I have blonde hair. You want to believe that? Go for it. To me, I say this every video. It should be self-explanatory. You take what resonates, you leave what doesn't. I'm not saying believe this, don't believe it. I'm just saying this is what the information is saying, okay? Let's keep going. Okay, so you may change your energy, which then would cause a related change in your reflection. You, however, cannot change your reflection in the mirror. You can change your appearance. Like I can dye my hair blonde. That is your body, and your reflection will then change in a like manner. However, you cannot change merely the reflection and not change that which causes the reflection. It is important to understand that the physical is merely a reflection. In order to change the reflection, you must change that which causes the reflection. So, to me, all this reflection talk is talking about internal. If you internally change your energy, so to me, that would be self love, right? That's what I'm currently working on. I sometimes have negative thoughts about my weight or certain parts of my body. So I'm working on radical self love, accepting my reflection as it is. And my hypothesis is that the more I cultivate self love for how I look, my reflection is, it will that love is going to reflect in how I look, my reflection. Does this make sense? I think it does. Okay, let's move on, shall we? Boom. Okay, now we're getting into where they're kind of being rude. So I'm talking about the Atlanteans here. So yeah, this is how they entertain themselves. Let me take a drink before we dive into this. Okay. There were arenas, and he's like, ooh, they were really cool. This is Dolores talking now. This was the first indication that something was different. Up to this point, his description sounded very much like the others. Apparently, everything was not at all paradise. As I said earlier, Atlantis was in existence for thousands of years, and perhaps John was seeing what it was like during the time it began to deteriorate. So this is at the end. The people in the city were beautiful and magnificent, yet the exterior hid a dark and ugly secret. And then John says, there are some real cruel things going on. Looks like people that are attached to the animal bodies. They've got them in this arena and they are forcing them to fight each other. It's like Roman gladiator contest type things. So I mentioned that to you earlier, how near the end they just were not being nice to these hybrid things. And so now she's like, well, you don't have to like watch them do this gladiator stuff. And he's like, it's not discomforting. This, yeah, it's just that these were genetic mistakes. They cannot reproduce. He's talking about like the centaur people. So why not just let them die? It's like a sport that these people enjoy. These people are very cruel. Um, so they go on. She asks him more and more questions about these events. So now they're talking more about this. Oh, I remember. So this next part is so they have these gladiator things, and then you have the hybrid animal people things that live, that win, and now they're going to share what happens to them. And it's sad. And they just kill them. There's a beam of light that comes out of the center right around their heart. It looks like a laser, except that it's a beam of light, not a laser. Ugh. And now I'm being taken to another place where they make these animals. These people are gathered before a drawing. There's an animal in a chamber separate from them, and they're visualizing a man's face on the animal. They're looking at a drawing of the animal with a human face, and they're manifesting that on this animal with their minds. They're concentrating on this, and this is to teach them how to manifest. There's a live animal in there. It looks like a dog. It's very painful for the animal to go through this. This is why I consider them cruel. There are 4 people that are doing this, a woman and 3 men. It takes their combined concentration. They're concentrating on putting a human face on this animal in this chamber. Sounds kind of fucked up, right? Like, essentially, from what I gathered about these Atlanteans, is they reach like the height of like psychic abilities, and they could create anything they wanted, right? They were powerful manifestors. And that's when it started to go dark. They essentially got bored and was like, well, we perfected ourselves. We've done all this other shit. We've made these cool buildings. We can do this, we can do that. Why not, make some weird animals and play around with that? And that's just when things just went, ooh, all right, let's keep going. I'm going to go a little bit further and then we're just going to stop. This is why Atlantis had to fall, because they were abusing the life force. They just didn't, they just did that to be inventive. I get the feeling they were not very nice people. I don't like being here. I'd like to get out of here. So they don't even want to, the person she's talking with doesn't even want to be around them. And that makes sense, right? Abusing the life force. Okay, we're going to go a little bit longer. I'm telling you, this chapter was so full of information. Oh, we only got 2 more. Perfect. Okay. So now they're talking about a healing room, like an Atlantean hospital, and they use light. which light therapy is a thing in our reality today. I have a friend who does it. But let's just read this. There are green, blue, red, violet, yellow, orange, and white. And each of these, he says, represents a different part of the body to heal. The white is to heal the etheric body and astral body. The green is to heal the physical body. The blue is to heal the emotional body. The red is to heal the casual body. These are all different bodies of the person. By sitting in these colored rays in harmony and in its sequence, one would be healed of any difficulty that lies within himself. So, unlike our health care system, at least here in the United States, it wasn't like you get sick and then you go. It sounds like from Atlantean healthcare, it was all like preventive care. So before nobody really got sick because you were all like, if you even felt a tinge off, you would go to one of these lights healing centers, which I want to say, if I remember correctly, was mainly for the wealthier, higher uppy type. They had other centers that weren't as fancy looking, but still did the same thing. And you would just sit in this light, and the light would just kind of bring you into balance. And so that's how they kept their health. Okay, I want to comment on a case I had in New Orleans. A man regressed to what he described as Atlantis, where he was a member of a group of priests. There was a high priest over them, and they were using crystals to try to counteract the negative influence of another group of scientists that were dominant. It seemed that the other group of scientists were using their mental powers and their mind control in negative ways. And they were also conducting experiments in negative ways. Thus, this group of priests were trying to counteract the negativity by using crystals and directing energy to try to negate the effects they were creating. But the priests were having problems. They had a group of crystals, and these had to be aligned in a certain order or pattern to create the highest degree of effectiveness, but it wasn't working. They kept rearranging them, using their minds, and it still wasn't able to work. Things gradually got worse, and the land was experiencing a great deal of seismic activity, and they knew that the continent was going to sink. I asked him how they knew for sure, and he said because of the negative things that the other group was doing, it was creating an imbalance, and everything was greatly out of balance. This, together with everything else that was happening, was creating the seismic activity. And they knew that the piece of land, this island or whatever, Atlantis, was going to sink. So they left and went somewhere else. And they ended up going to like Egypt like area, and they gave their info there. But I remember I highlighted that because I wanted to just clarify that not everybody at the end of Atlantis was like evil. To me, this is very parallel, right? To like our world today. Like, not everybody in our world today is evil, but there are evil groups that do weird, evil shit, right? So I found that interesting. But I'm gonna stop there. There's more we could go into about like the Loch Ness and stuff, but I would just encourage you to read those yourself. And obviously, join us on November 2nd at 6 p.m. And I believe that's a Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time. And we'll just talk all about it, you guys. I found this chapter was insanely long. I'm a slow reader, so it took me a while to get through it all. And there was just so much info on these Atlanteans. It was very, very interesting. I found it, yeah, very interesting. I'm curious to see what other people say about Atlantis now. I personally have not seen or tapped into a past life of myself in Atlantis. So I have no idea if I did that. I kind of feel more connected to Lemuria, but again, I don't freaking know anything about it. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think? Excuse me, what do you think about Atlantis? Do you like Atlantis? Do you think it fell because it went astray and it was out of balance? Very curious, but that's it for this. I will try to make a video about the next part 4 in the book, and I'll put that out next week. Love you guys. Blessings to you all. Namaste.